This program is brought to you by cable franchise fees and generous donations from viewers like you.
I think in the interest of time, if the boards and committees are okay skipping the roll call component, then we'll trust that the chairs have counted correctly. Is that okay with you, Ben?
Yeah, I also can't see everyone, so that makes it much.
That is the other unspoken challenge of virtual meetings with this many people, for sure. So I'm going to look to President Griezman to see if there are any boards or committees, other boards or committees in the town of Amherst that need to be called based on the composition of members.
Thanks, Dr. Morris. We do. Therefore, I'm calling the town council, the Amherst Town Council, to order for the purposes of this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other boards or committees in the town that of Amherst that need to be called Finance Committee or anything like that? Hearing none, then I will assume that not. So in alphabetical order, Leverett would be next. So are there any boards and committees in town of Leverett that need to be called?
Only one.
I think
only one school committee member here so far.
Okay. Julie, I think you need to unmute if you're trying to.
I'm only seeing myself at this point, but I can't see everybody. So I don't know if Tom or Melissa are here, but yep. I'll call to order anyway in case they show up.
Okay. Yep. And the way on the Google Meets, you can see on the bottom right, you should see an icon and a number 43, I believe. And that does allow you to see other folks who are on the meeting if you can't see that many faces.
Yeah, I just have a screen that says 28 others, so they might be in the 28 others.
Very good. Thank you. Are there any other boards or committees in Leverett, or we should move on?
Finance Committee has a quorum. I'll call it to order.
Thank you very much. Okay, we'll go over to our good friends in Pelham. Are there any boards or committees in Pelham that should be called to order?
Call a Finance Committee to order.
Okay. Any other boards or committees? Not hearing any. And then I will go to Shutesbury. Are there any boards or committees in Shutesbury that should be called to order?
I'll call the Shutesbury Select Board to order.
And this is Jim Walton. We have the full Finance Committee from Shutesbury. I'd like to call them to order.
Great.
And I'll call the Shutesbury School Committee to order.
Thanks, Dan. Great. Well, thank you again. It's 9:07, so we're doing well so far. Just the logistics of this meeting is that for folks who want to be recognized, there's a raised hand feature on the bottom. It's kind of the bottom of your screen. And we're going to rely on that throughout the meeting for folks who want to jump in and participate, which we hope you do. We'll ask folks to unmute. I have the ability, as does Maylene, our minute taker, to mute the group if someone's forgetting about that. We'll do that from time to time to make sure that everyone can hear the speaker. Our general format is that in a minute, I'm going to introduce Ben Harrington, as I said, the chair. He's going to do a very brief welcome. I'll share a very brief, less than 5-minute state of the schools now that we're about halfway through the school year. And then I'll turn it over to Dr. Doug Slaughter, our finance director, and he's going to go through where we are with preliminary projections for the next school year, both in terms of the operational capital budget. I think what I'd like to suggest is he'll present the operational budget, pause, gather feedback from the member towns, and then finish up with the capital budget instead of trying to do one full swoop of all of it. That's a lot to take in. We will end by 11. As was noted before, it was intentionally said to 10:30. That's an aspirational goal for letting you out and enjoying the rest of your Saturday. It's the only sunny one we're going to have between yesterday and tomorrow, and a little bit of a stretch. So I know some people might want to enjoy the snow. Not that we got as much as some other folks in Eastern Mass, but we still got some. So we want to be respectful of your time. But this is a really important meeting. When we bring the 4 towns together, the 4 towns are the region. Right? You contribute, you fund the region, but you offer incredible supports that are non-financial as well. So it's an opportunity to talk a bit about our district, where we're doing, how we're spending those resources, as well as looking forward to next year and beyond for some very tricky issues, right? Many of you have been at 4-town meetings for years, and you know that there's some competing variables and forced choices that need to be made. We want to be respectful and honest about them. And what we believe is that the best way we can get through that is by honest dialogue that's respectful of all parties, but hopefully pushes us forward as a district, as a region, to provide the best education we can for the students in our 4 towns. With that, I will turn it over to Ben for a welcome, and then I'll loop back, talk a little state of the schools before turning it over to Doug.
Thank you. So I'm Ben Harrington, chair of the Regional School Committee. I just want to, so in the interest of an efficient use of time, I'm going to keep it very brief here, but I just want to thank everyone for taking time out of your busy schedules to come here and participate in this. I believe this to be one of the most, the most important process in planning for our schools. So once again, thank you all for coming out, and let's get down to business here. We'll get the state of the
Thank you
union.
very much. Thanks, Ben. So again, I'll be brief in terms of the educational side, but it would be remiss not to have this group together and talk a bit about what's going on in our schools. So as I mentioned, we're about halfway, about 44% through the school year. And we've had a great school year. Our educators should be commended for working on very, very challenging situation. Our facilities group, our bus drivers, everyone has come together and provided a really valuable experience for our students this year. We're no different than other districts. What we know is that our students are struggling at higher levels. The pandemic has affected since mental health, and we've provided some support, many supports in place for that, as well as academic standing. So we have a more challenging set of circumstances than we've had in the past, and our educators are rising to that challenge, and as I said, should be commended for their work this year. We've, as I mentioned, 44% of the school year done. I couldn't be having this conversation without talking about COVID, right? Because it's been a major factor, right? You can't look at a newspaper and not read articles about COVID in schools. So at this point, we've had many cases throughout the year. We've had zero cases, zero evidence of any school-based transmission in our district this year. And that's something we can't guarantee will last forever, but it's something we, I would say, are almost obsessed with, making sure that our schools maintain a very strong track record of not being causes of COVID spread. To achieve that, we've spent significant resources, and that's mostly come through our ESSER grants. Towns received ARPA grants, districts received ESSER grants around COVID. Some of the things that we've spent funds are, we've greatly increased the ventilation in every single room that students and adults are in during the school day, classrooms, large group spaces as well, to be at or above 4 air changes an hour, which is the recommended level. To compare it in your homes, where most of us are right now, the air change rate is about a third of one, about 0.33 air changes per hour. So in the rooms in our schools, they're significantly higher. We've also spent significant resources on staffing. We've increased our mental health staffing to support students along that dimension. People are out more, not just because of COVID, but if you don't feel well, we're encouraging folks to stay home as a safety measure. So our substitute line, we've tried to institute some permanent sub positions so that we can remain staffed and students can receive a high quality education. We've just purchased, given Omicron and the high spread that we're experiencing both locally, statewide, and across, frankly, the world, we've recently invested in significant resources in KN95 masks, and we can guarantee one for every student every day for the next couple of weeks, and we'll see how we may need to extend that. We know that some students are wearing high quality, high filtration masks, which I'll put in a plug for in this meeting because I can't say it enough in every setting. And we didn't want economic barriers to prevent students from wearing a high filtration mask, right? How safe you are shouldn't depend on your income. And so those came in this week, and the distribution already started a little bit this week at the middle school, high school level, and it'll come in earnest on Monday when students return after the snow day yesterday. We have offered 13 vaccine clinics to date in our schools, including one on Wednesday. I think it's important to note that we have not closed participation from the community. So the one on Wednesday, 187 folks got shots, most boosters, but this is the optimistic side of me, likes that there were some first shots given. That train hasn't stopped. It certainly slowed, but it hasn't stopped. But it was open to everyone in the community. It was available for registration online. We posted it far and wide, and I was at about half of the clinic. And while there was a lot of Amherst Regional Public School families there, there was also a lot of community members, a lot of seniors who came for their booster, both at the ones we did last month as well as on Wednesday. And we feel like it's a community service to be able to offer vaccine clinics. We know how important and valuable that is, and we're going to continue to offer them. We have another one on January 26th, but we'll also have walk-ins for boosters. So it's another way that we've looked at it. And at every one of our clinics, we've had members of all 4 communities attending, whether it's be students, families, or general community members. So we're spending a lot, but it's our goal is to keep students safe and in school and staff safe and in school throughout what we're seeing as the largest surge we've had yet in Massachusetts. And so while there are there's certainly challenges, it is we are using our ESSER funds directly to achieve those goals. We'd love them to be more available for things like, preserving positions in the budget and all that. And we're trying our best to preserve some of that to be able to accomplish that. But with Omicron, we certainly had to reinvest more resources into health and safety than even we did over the last 18 to 20 months. On a more positive side, we've been able to make some transitions during the pandemic that we thought were in the best interest of students. Many of you know that we've talked about changing the start times of schools this is my 21st year in the district. I think this came up my first year in the district, and it kept on coming up and coming up and coming up. And all the research indicates that for middle school and high school students, starting school at 7:45 was like for the rest of us starting at 5 o'clock. Biologically, they're not designed for that. And so we did make that transition where middle school and high school students are attending school at 9 o'clock. And while there is some challenges to work out with students who work after school or play sports, we are working, and the high school team's been very dynamic at coming up with solutions. But what we're noticing is kids aren't falling asleep in first period class, right? They're attentive, they're awake, they're engaged, and they're learning, and that's what we want. So that's been a pretty significant shift. At the high school level, we finally settled on a block schedule, which provides more opportunities for elective offerings, which we know are so valuable for our students. It means there's an additional elective that students can take every single year, often 2 electives that students can take every single year they're at the high school. And what we know about our high school students is when they're engaged in learning, when they want to come to school, when they love the courses they're taking, that has broad implications both for their academic performance, but also their mental health and well-being. So we're glad to be able to make that shift. We started last year, and then we fully implemented this year and making some tweaks for next year. Speaking of electives, we had the school committee had a meeting last month where we had every December, we invite teachers to present new courses that they could be considering for the next school year. And we just had some dynamite new courses developed by our teachers related to disability justice, fiber arts, engineering for social good and very practical course, advanced robotics, additional dance electives, and physical education. And so those are dependent on having a budget that can support them, not necessarily to increase. They're replacing courses that have lower enrollment, but these are courses that there's high excitement for in the district, that students are demanding us offer. And always a question I often get is, how do you choose what courses are offered in the high school? And it's the students really make the choice, right? If students aren't choosing to take a course, the course doesn't happen. And these are courses directly related to high interest conversations from our students at our high school that they're eager to take, and that is dependent on the budget. And I think the final thing I say is that, you'll see this in Dr. Slaughter's presentation, but we've been pretty successful the last couple of years at not seeing a large increase in our charter school enrollment. That influences our budget. For those of you who don't know, every student who goes to charter school, that gets charged to the regional school's budget line. And so in addition to just the community feeling of having students stay at home in our district, it has huge financial implications. We still have a significant number of students who are attending charter school. But for many years, until about 3 years ago, we were seeing a pretty significant shift, an increase year after year after year as students going to charter schools. And really, that's, I guess, my plug as we turn to Dr. Slaughter and think about the budget is we're in a competitive marketplace. We have a couple middle school, high school, 2 in close proximity charter schools, one in South Hadley and one in Hadley, that do attract, recruit, and try to draw our students as I understand their perspective. That's their mission, to maintain a high quality middle school and high school education. So it's incredibly important that we're able to maintain our programming, not just for the sake of our community feel, but actually fiscally when we start getting to the place where we're cutting courses and electives that our students are excited about, we can be doubled down in terms of the financial impact because of the nature of the choices that our students have. It's perhaps different than it was 20 years ago when there weren't those other choices and there weren't the financial incentives as such. And that's really the balance that we have. We know the towns have financial pressures. We know the pressures you're under. And we're trying to maintain a regional school system that makes us proud, provides a high quality education for students in our 4 towns, but also provides financial stability by not seeing swings in charter school enrollment that can happen if it's perceived that we're losing ground in the competitive marketplace of education that we find ourselves in the Valley. So I went a little over 5 minutes. I'm sorry, Doug, but you know me well enough to know that's a challenge for me, 5 minutes. So I tried my best. With that, I'll turn it over to Doug Slaughter, and he's going to start by presenting the operational level services budget, looking at what that is and the factors. We'll pause. We'll do both clarifying questions, and we'll hear from each member town. We'll have some dialogue, but I'm going to try to say about an hour from now, if not sooner, we absolutely need to get to the Capitol because there are some decisions that need to be made, not today, but we want today's information to inform those decisions over the next month or two on the Capitol side as well. So with that, Doug, I'll turn it over to you. I will open up the ability to share your slides. You should be able to at this point now, Doug, and thank you again for being here.
Thank you, Dr. Morris. So as my slide deck starts to come up here, I'll just say welcome to everyone and thank you for taking some time out on your Saturday morning to go through this with us. Appreciate you being here. So we'll start, keep it, there's the sort of agenda we were talking about. There's a couple of things that I'll try to frame for us as we get started here. One of the things that I'll say is that there's a lot to be determined over the next, literally in the next couple of weeks. We'll learn a lot of new things regarding what the governor's budget looks like, what Chapter 70 will look like, what our insurance will look like as far as our rate increases, and a number of other things that we're still sort of in the process of shaping and understanding and making estimates on for our coming fiscal year. So I'll take us through expenses first, then I'll go into revenue and assessment options. And then, as the superintendent said, we'll take a little break, get some feedback from you all relative to those topics. Then we'll get into capital. There's some interesting and difficult things to sort of work our way through a little bit on capital, and then we'll take some more questions there. To start out with, what I'm sharing with you is what's called a level services budget, what we call, let me define that a little bit. Basically, the way I think of that and the way we do this is from a level services standpoint, is we take sort of all the operational things that we're doing right at the moment, the staffing levels that we have at the time that we do this, which is over the last couple of months. And we say, all right, if we're going to take that and roll it into a new year, what are the things that come with that? And so with our staffing, there's obligations for steps and COLAs relative to the contracts we negotiate with those folks and the unions that represent them. We make adjustments and adaptations on known things like contractual increases in our transportation or estimates of what we think our utility costs are going to be for the coming year and our usage is going to be. And so we review our existing spending and our past history and try to predict what those things will be. In our next phase, when we go from level services, we'll have conversations and are having conversations with our directors and administrators and others around what are the more programmatic type changes, the sort of what are the needs that we need to address. And so additions to the budget, what are the things we don't need so much, and reductions or cuts, adjustments we can make. Sometimes some things are one-time expenses we don't need, so we can bypass those for a year and then come back to them. So all of those things will be kind of in the next round where we really are adjusting from sort of the status quo. But in going with this level of services, what we are doing in predicting this is trying to estimate, and whether it be formally with things like step increases for employees or contractual obligations that are predefined, but also other things we're trying to estimate, changes to those things that we know we're going to have to do. We're going to have to heat the buildings. We're going to have to provide lighting and those sort of things. So we try to capture all of that. So let me go to the next slide. So a few things about the expense projections. We're predicting a payroll increase of 1.4%. So when we get to the next slide, which actually has sort of a grid of numbers and that sort of thing, The key thing to remember about that increase of 1.4% is that's just steps. We're basing that on the current salary schedule because we have 5 contracts of our 6 which are not yet settled. We're in process with our unions on that. So any type of cost of living increase, which would affect the whole grid, but particularly those at the top step, we have factored that in. We've made an estimate of that. I'll be less clear because we are in negotiations and we want to be fair to our negotiating partners to not have that happen in public. So in our control accounts section of our budget, we've included some estimates for that. There are other things in our control accounts as well. So it's not you can't sort of tie one to one necessarily, and that's by design. But the idea is that, that we have factored into the overall budget. So those cost of living increases as best we can estimate them at the moment. But we certainly taken into account the steps and increases that are on our current salary schedule for our staff. We're going to use about $750,000 in school choice revenues. That's a little higher than we've used in previous years. So that creates, I don't want to say a problem, but it is something we have to keep in mind as we look to future years. We probably won't be quite that high in use of school choice to support our budget in coming years. So that will be a factor that I want people to be aware of as far as future planning is concerned. But we do, and we currently sit in a pretty strong position. We've used less school choice over the last couple of years because our budgets came in well under budget, so well under expectations, and so we were able to sort of reserve more school choice revenue to sort of utilize in the future, and the future is here, so we're going to use some of that. In our other programs like Charter and Choice, the superintendent talked about the charter numbers. We're holding those fairly steady to what we've had. I think we're going to see the same kind of numbers of students. So we've been conservative in that regard. We haven't aggressively increased or decreased those. But it is a real, those charter expenses and choice expenses are real. Vocational tuitions will probably go up. They're tied to inflation. If you think about, if you've gone to hardware stores lately and you've seen the price of those kind of goods, inflation is going to impact that. The state will make its, determinations on vocational schools tuitions, in the coming fall. But I did put in some expectation of those being increased. On the risk and benefits, this is the area where we can capture our insurance costs. Right now, we're projecting a 4% increase to the rate of our insurance. So that's one piece of it. The other piece of our insurance costs is how many people we have signed up for health insurance. We've had fairly modest numbers of people because we went through a period through the last couple of years where we weren't, because we were in a remote circumstance, we didn't have as many staff on hand in person. And so we had fewer people as employees. That reduced our number of people on our insurance. Our numbers on insurance have gone up a little bit as far as the number of people taking advantage of that benefit. And then, of course, you've got the increase in the actual rates themselves. So the 4% is relative to the rate that we are charged for insurance. And then we also have that factors into that 7.1% increases a little bit higher numbers. Now, not 100 more people, but a few more people, but it adds up relatively quickly. So wanted to mention that. Other insurance, property insurance, it has gone up pretty significantly over the last couple of years. We've adjusted the budget more significantly this year to capture that change in our baseline costs. And the other areas of the budget have that as well. There's some areas of the budget, as you see there, central administration, our legal costs have gone up over the last few years. And so we're trying to capture that. And so, in our budgeting, I've tried to this year, in places where the costs have risen and stayed at a higher level, I've tried to adjust the budget up to meet that need. Obviously, if there are areas of the budget where we are spending less than what we had been budgeting for, we've gone through and tried to reduce those down. Obviously, trying to balance those two factors out as much as we possibly can. But it does make for some areas of the budget that show sort of percentage increases that can be larger than you might expect. And so you see that in that central administration line. And just the notation about information technology, last year, by virtue of using some of those ESSER funds to buy technology so we could do remote learning with kids, we were in good shape as far as our investment in technological equipment. So we reduced our traditional level of spending by about $50,000. We're just restoring that. Consider that to be kind of a level funding circumstance, but you add $50,000 to a budget line, it's a pretty big impact there. So those are the primary things around the expense projections that I want to make sure to mention to everyone. This is the grid of numbers. I'm going to increase the size just a little bit here to see if I can make it a little more visible to everybody. Some of those notes are at the bottom are the same. And so in this column, this third from the right column is the actual, sort of compiled estimates of things as far as what our costs are going to be, the sort of raw number increase or decrease relative to that, and then percentage change relative to the previous year. And so again, if we have a significant change in a spending category and we make the adjustment to our budgeting to match with our actual spending, then sometimes that percentage can be quite high. One other thing I'll point out here is that kind of jumps out. It's not a big dollar amount per se, as far as the overall budget, but nonetheless a big percentage change here under English language learner education. That's really a programmatic shift. We've got some feedback from the state. We had them come in and look through our program and give us recommendations. We've made some programmatic shifts to how we deliver that service to our kids. And so what it does is it shifts some of that cost from our expense account area, and really it's sort of I don't want to say hidden, but it is more sort of staff on hand. So it's a programmatic shift, and so it kind of gets lost in these numbers of salaries, but that's really that programmatic shift has caused that change in English language learner education. So there's a little difference in where we sort of are spending the money to provide that service and programmatically deliver that. And so I think that the rest of the items in particular that we wanted to mention, I mentioned in before this slide, I will note we're going to continue to fund OPEB, which is other post-employment benefits. So we're trying to build up our trust fund over time and factor in the long-term obligations we have to our employees and our retirees, trying to meet those expenses and do that sort of long-term planning for that. And sort of the control accounts is down here, and again we're sort of factoring in that a variety of things, but one of which is some expectations around what we think we'll need to do to meet the obligations to our employees around cost of living increases as we negotiate through the contracts. I think that covers most of what I wanted to say on the expense side of the equation, and so I'll move on to the revenue side. Back just a little bit. Ooh. We've taken I've taken a very conservative approach relative to Chapter 78. I've held it flat. It's a bit of a, I think it's a little harder this year to predict. There's, the indications that revenues to the state, tax revenues to the state as a whole are quite strong. And so, there's optimism that may result in some strong funding for Chapter 70. Then again, maybe not. More often than not, we fall into a sort of marginal increase there in the sort of $35,000 range. I didn't factor that in at this point. I wanted to wait and see. The governor's budget will come out in a couple of weeks, and that'll help frame it for us. But it'll will likely have some increase. It could be really good news if there's a strong push into funding for Chapter 70. But we'll see if that plays out. I thought, given the number of other variables we had on the sort of expense and unknown side of things, that it wasn't. It was still appropriate to sort of hold steady on this as a conservative way to approach Chapter 70. I think there's some modest increase to our transportation reimbursement. As a regional school district, we get reimbursements from the state for transportation. And so, the state's been very good the last couple of years of kind of holding steady on its funding, which as a percentage, if you look at the news, the percentage of reimbursement they're giving us has gone up because most people's transportation expenses went down because they were remote. But nonetheless, it gives them a sort of bragging point on percentage of reimbursement. Total dollars just kind of held steady, and so I think that's going to still happen and maybe go up just a little bit. But the other thing I want to point out is that we've built our E&D. E&D is our reserves, or if you're looking at town finances, they talk about free cash. It's that aspect of our budget. We do have limitations on how much of that we can hold. If we get above 5% of our operating budget, we have to give relief to the 4 communities. So we're trying to maintain a good balance so we have a safety net, but at the same time support our budgets with that. We're going to use a little larger number this year. We finished last year well under. It was such an unpredictable year about how much we would be in person or not, and so we held in advance a fair amount of funding, and we ended the year in a very, very strong position. So our reserves have grown, And so we'll use a significant chunk of that to help support our budget. So again, one-time money. So it does, it does mean we'll need to taper that over the next couple of years to not have sort of a shock of loss of revenue. But at the same time, it does provide a pretty strong amount of support for us in this coming year. And so, we won't be able to fund it at the level that I'm projecting for this coming year, which I'll not detain and move on to the next slide so you can actually see what I'm projecting there. But at the same time, I think we'll be in a decent circumstance as far as having good support from E&D to help our budget. And so what I've laid out here on this revenue chart, and those of you who've been in these meetings before have kind of seen this before. There's multiple methods that we're looking at, different ways in which we can apportion and allocate the cost to each of the 4 communities. But if we, to just take you through a particular column, not to emphasize one over another one, but this first number in this row right here, and I'm sorry that this is a pretty busy slide, so hopefully you've got a copy of it yourself that you can look at more closely, is our expectation of what that level service is. So the sort of bottom line of that expenses sheet showed us about a little over $33 million is a starting point.
Doug, can I interrupt just for Doug?
Yes.
This is Mike. For folks who haven't used Google Meets before, if you double click on the at this point is the presentation, you'll lose being able to see a couple people, but it will be about 25% larger. So again, if this is a nice pastel color schemed document, if you double click on it, at least on my screen, it helps me see it a lot clearer. So I'm sorry for the logistical interruption, Doug, but I just wanted to see if that would help people be able to follow it a little better. No, absolutely. Thank you for that. And it is important for people to be able to see this as best they can. Sort of the top, probably 2/3 of this doesn't change very much from each scenario to each scenario. So we have this sort of expense line here. It's showing about a 4% increase, which we saw on that expense slide. We're estimating that Chapter 70, I'm holding it steady at the moment. We have our estimates for our revenue from transportation reimbursement, from the state reimbursing us. Our Medicaid reimbursement, we provide services that qualify for Medicaid reimbursement. Being remote the last couple of years, those numbers have gone down considerably. Being in person this year, we'll have more of that reimbursable expense that we'll be able to receive, and so I'm moderately increasing that number. Traditionally, we've had as high as $100,000 or $120,000 in support that way. I put it at $90,000, which is probably realistic as we get back into the swing of being in person and providing those services to kids and then qualifying and getting those reimbursements. Charter school reimbursement is shown there. I've held it steady. I think that's going to be kind of where we sit for now. And what's not shown here, but is on the expense side and a little bit buried in there is the tuition part that we pay. The tuition side of it is a pretty considerable number. There's these two kind of offset each other. Obviously, the expense of tuition is much higher than the reimbursement. Reimbursement is a transitional assistance that the state provides as new students choose to go to charter schools. Our interest revenue should hold steadily at about where it has been. The E&D support you see there, the $700,000, that's a bigger number than past years. This current year, we took a very conservative approach to that relative to the previous year's E&D level. It's built back up. We have the ability to leverage that and utilize that to support our budget in the coming year. The E&D for contingency of $280, we sort of set aside that chunk of money to use in case of an unexpected expense or overage in a way that we aren't expecting. We try, as with any contingency, to not spend it if we can, and so we're hoping to not, but we need to have those funds available and try to consider that as an option if we need to. So what that does is that gives us the overall assessment to be shared by the 4 towns, the part that you guys as leaders in your communities have to ask your communities for and to fund. And so that's about $21,421,000 is where we're at the moment. And again, we're going to go through a process of looking at needs and additions that we have, adjustments and changes that we know will reduce our budget. And then we'll probably have some conversations about things we no longer need or can provide as part of that, the ongoing process of building our budget from where we sit now at level services. And so that's gets us to the number that we need to then share amongst the 4 communities. And we've had
ongoing conversations over the last several years about how to do that. State provides two methods, a statutory method, and any other method you use is called an alternative assessment. So a statutory method uses an ability to pay factor, and it uses a determination called a minimum local contribution from each community. It's a single year number that changes. Matter of fact, the minimum local contributions, the estimates for that number will come out with the governor's budget as well in late January. The numbers that are used in calculating that purely statutory method here are using the fiscal 22 numbers. From one year to the next, they change. They can change considerably. That's part of why we use and have been using when considering alternate methods that involve the statutory method. We use a 5-year average of those minimum contributions, which tends to dampen out any spikes that we see. Our regional agreement has a method defined which uses a 5-year rolling average of the students, and so that regional agreement method would still be considered an alternative method. That puts the per pupil cost to each community the same, but it doesn't factor in the ability to pay. And so the resources that the state considers are available for folks to use to pay their part. So in the current year, we've used a 5-year average of those minimum local contributions, and then 65% of that to fund the budget, and then the remainder being apportioned to the towns using the regional agreement method. One thing I will say about just the pure statutory method is that it applies up to those minimum local contributions. We fund our budget well above those minimum contributions, and so the portion above that level is broken out by our regional agreement method. So even when we have a circumstance, if we were to use the full statutory method as it's defined by the state, we would still have a pretty significant portion of our budgets apportioned by that regional agreement method. So what I've laid out here, and this is based on our feedback from our last meeting, is a series of different options that we have. The far right column, which I've labeled green, which is a light green, is our regional agreement method, what that looks like. We have not used that for several years. The column immediately to its left is kind of a peach color, is the pure statutory method. Again, this is based on last year's minimum local contributions, so that will change a little bit. That's one of those, for me, that's a struggle just in this method generally, is because those minimum local contributions aren't precisely set until the budget is signed, which is in July, which is after everybody's voted. So it doesn't usually change much at that point, but nonetheless, it is a variable. When we use a 5-year rolling average, then we can use the previous 5 years to set a more fixed number early on. So the other columns that are here, starting with this what I've labeled as a pink column over to the blue, are using varying percentages of that 5-year rolling average to provide a leverage of the statutory method to cover some of it, and then the regional agreement method for the remainder. Like I said, the current year we're using a 65%, so this is an indication of that 65%. I showed 55 as a comparative, and then we have 75 and 85 and 100 as you go left to right. And so that shows you how those different percentages start to impact each of your 4 communities. And I'm pretty sure that the percentage increase from the previous year, which is that percentage column in here, is probably higher than anyone is thinking about for the current year, and what their current projections are. I understand that. I think that what this does is give you a frame of reference for where we are, and some sense of what those assessments are going to look like for the operating budget. And I'll just point out this bottom section here. What I'm showing with that is the sort of, and the percentages are where we'll show it, is the percentage of that assessment that is paid or covered by the minimum local contribution piece. And that, and when I say minimum local contribution, that's the one that takes into account the sort of ability to pay. It takes into account income in communities and their property tax base, and then the percentage is covered by the regional agreement method. And so you can kind of see as we work from more from less less statutory method to more statutory, you sort of see that shift in percentages toward the minimum local contribution covering a greater portion of the budget. So I think I've laid out most of the pieces there. I think I'm going to stop at this point and allow for people to pose questions, ask about things that I might have missed or clarifying things, and then obviously provide some feedback about these assessment methods and where your communities sit relative to those. And one quick thing I will say, just operationally for budgeting purposes, and it's just a reminder for folks, if you use anything other than the straight statutory method from the state, you do have to vote that, and all 4 communities must agree to that. That is a critical step in getting the budgets passed. If we don't have agreement on an assessment method, our budget is not passed. The actual dollars part, 3 of the 4 can pass that part, but the assessment method requires all 4 of us to agree on. And the other piece is that whatever method we do agree to, we do have to run that to the commissioner and get commissioner's permission or approval of that. So I do need to send that information off to the commissioner's office for review and approval. If we don't have some, we've had this sort of modified method approved in the past with different percentages. So structurally, I think they've generally been agreeable to allowing that. There are obviously other options. We could make up a whole new one. I'm not suggesting that, but if somebody had a really great idea, I'm open to hearing it. But those do have to go through and get vetted by the commissioner's office and approved. So that is part of our process as well. And we'd want that clarity from them before we get to anybody's town meeting or town council votes. So I think I'll pause here and we'll see if there are clarifying questions or comments and feedback for us relative to what I presented.
Thank you, Doug. And what I'm going to suggest is that we'll do about 10 minutes of clarifying questions, and then we'll transition to give the towns time to offer feedback and have that conversation before we head over to Capitol. But if you do want to participate and ask a question or perhaps offer a comment, please use the raise hand feature that's towards the bottom of the screen, and I'll try to be facilitating who I see and go in order. But our first comment or question is from John Trickey. So John, go ahead.
It appears that there's a fairly big increase for Pelham, and I assume that has to do with the ratio of students. Your chart at the end shows a declining number of students in the regional school. My specific question is, what is the decline number and what are we down to in the region? Secondly, what is Pelham's percentage? And thirdly, at one point we used to have a forecast based on the elementary schools in the region of what those future ratios would look like, which was great for us to look in planning. Can we get that back again?
So I'll start with the last one first. Yes, absolutely, we can do that. We can look at that projection. One of the things that's a little tricky now is because it was such that any kid that was in your elementary school that was school choice was automatically allowed to remain and continue forward into the regional schools as a school choice student. That is not the case. They re-enter the lottery, so that makes it a little harder to predict. Those wouldn't be tied to your assessment, just as a factor that comes into sort of the overall enrollment question. The regional school for this year, and I think I may have it on the last slide. Sorry, as I skip over things here. I think I have a slide. There that's the overall enrollment here on the left-hand side, what you're seeing. What I'll say specifically to Pelham, your enrollments increased just a little bit, and so your percentage as far as the 5-year rolling average has gone up. I want to say like a full percentage point in the last year or so, which is a little atypical. You've had a little uptick in Pelham students. It's a little hard to tell on this chart. You've got the maroon section that's slightly larger than it was. The overall, though, is sitting here. And again, this picture in particular, if you're looking at these, is the overall number of students, which includes the full number of students they're responsible for. So if they go to a vocational school, they're in this list. So it's not the kids that are just in the building. When you're seeing here, what you're seeing is kids go to charter, kids go to choice, kids that go to private schools and vocational schools. So it's the full list here. But I can certainly, to your point, I did note that Pelham's percentage is probably up a little bit this year, and maybe even the last 2 years it's up a percentage point or two, which can have a big impact. A percentage point on that other chart can have a pretty significant impact on your assessment. But to the point of getting back to the predictive part, I definitely can put that together for you, and would be happy to do that and get that shared out.
Thank you.
Thanks. And I see 2 more hands, and I think might be helpful, especially in this virtual meeting, if people share what town they're from as well when they spoke. John Trickey was from Pelham. I can do that for you, John. AJ Kashu is the next hand I saw.
Hi there. From Shutesbury, and I just had a quick question. I think at the last meeting, it was mentioned that there was a need to update the regional agreement, and that was, I think, a requirement of our charter. Could you just clarify, is that something that is, was that correct? Is that the case, that we are going to need a new regional agreement? And what is the timing of that process, and would that factor into the FY23 budget, or is that something that would impact these discussions in future years?
Yep, I can jump in with that one, Doug. So last month, I believe the Regional School Committee reached out to the Amherst Town Council, and I think what you're referencing is that we have a town council. We don't have 4 town meetings anymore. We technically have 3 towns in a city instead of 4 towns, and so those are cosmetic changes in some ways. I don't mean that we want to value all 4 of our towns, but they're not kind of functionally changing the organization. So the Regional School Committee wrote a letter to the town manager of Amherst and the town council. I've had conversations with town manager Bockelman, and I think we're looking into the legality of whether we need to change the regional agreement, or are there other ways that can resolve that sort of logistical, technical nature without opening up the whole regional agreement. So they have not formally responded, so I don't want to speak for the town manager of Amherst or town council, but at this point, what I can say confidently is that the Regional School Committee did reach out with some concerns about opening it up. Typically, it's a 3 to 5 year process. There's a whole bunch of other things, but at this point, we're not looking in the short term to open up the regional agreement until we get more clarity on the legal implications of that.
Thanks.
Thank you. And the next hand I saw, and actually it might be helpful, I'm going to keep on correcting myself, if people could share not just what the town they're from, but what member board or committee they're representing, that would be helpful. So I'm sorry, I should have said that earlier, but next I see Rita Farrell. Rita, I think you have to unmute yourself.
Got it. Rita Farrell from Shutesbury Select Board, and AJ is from the Shutesbury Finance Committee. Doug, I just had a question on the risk and benefits increase. So that's pretty significant. Can you speak to how it's allocated between increases in number of enrollees and anticipated increases in the cost of insurance?
Yeah, so number of enrollees, I think the key thing is that, that percentage increase on number of enrollees is based on, sort of fiscal 21. We probably had the lowest number we've had in several years. In 21, we did a fairly, we took a conservative approach in fiscal 20 as the pandemic started, and part of 21 to not replace if people left, if we didn't, absolutely need to, we didn't replace people. So it sort of artificially shrunk our population. But the overall increase is for just health insurance is roughly 8%. So it's basically half as the rate increase at the current time, and then half would be just the sort of increase in membership. And the thing to keep in mind is an individual, when you're looking at that, 5 individuals can have a pretty significant impact. A couple of people is a percentage point. So the difference between +5 and -5 is a pretty big swing in percentage there. So, we're up a little bit. I think, like I said, of the 8 to 9% we're projecting for health insurance alone, probably half of that is related to more people on the enrollment. It's not a huge number of people that have changed, but a little bit more. And then the other half is the rates. I do expect. I mean, this is a pretty 4% is a pretty conservative estimate. We had a meeting in the fall with our insurance provider, and our performance as far as we pay in premiums, and then we have expenses against that. They like to see your expenses about 90% of your premiums. In some areas we're well under that. In other areas we're above that. And so, we'll likely see an increase of some sort. We're hoping it's not in that 4. It'd be lovely to not have 4%, but at the same time, it may be that high because there's some inflationary pressures just more broadly in the area. In other insurance that we're seeing, and these are much smaller as a total of that area of the budget. Property, we've had double-digit increases in our property insurance over the last couple of years, and so we're adjusting that projection of that cost a little bit to account for those. And we usually adjust it up. We just need to make a bigger adjustment than in the past. But it's as a factor in that budget line, it's a much smaller one, but still it's a piece of the puzzle there.
Thank you.
Thank you. And the next hand I see is Lynn Griezman. I just want to note too, I should have said on the earlier question about, it wasn't the regional school committee, it was actually the Amherst school committee that was jumping in on the regional achievement question as per the Amherst town charter. But with that, I will go to the Lynn Griezman. And if you could identify yourself and your board and then your comment or question.
Lynn Griezman, Amherst Town Council. You identified 2 areas that are in the risk and benefit, I believe, that are essentially catching up with trends. One was property insurance, and the other one was legal costs. I don't think property insurance leads me to ask a question, but I am curious as to what has been driving the legal cost increase.
So a couple of things. So I think, a small percentage of that is around the pandemic. We've seen some increases in legal costs just because we've negotiated memorandum of understanding with our various unions. That is a little more negotiation than we normally have. That's a small factor, but it's a non-zero factor, and that will likely be something that persists for another couple of years. But I think our overall legal costs have increased and held at a higher level over the last few years. And we're not alone in this. I think this is a nationwide trend, quite frankly, that there's a lot more, sort of issues and questions that come up between labor and management. And so those need some legal guidance to work our way through those. It's not necessarily good or bad. It's not a statement about that, but it's a reflection in adjusting that budget of truly capturing that expense in a proper way. And so we're seeing an increase in those costs, and so we want to reflect that properly in a budget. And I don't think we're doing anything sort of atypical of any other district or any other organization. But those kinds of increases are being seen, I think, in communities around the Commonwealth and really around the nation.
Can I ask another question, please?
Sure.
So your projections rely on increases in school choice and E&D funding, and yet you have already said you don't plan to use that at the same level in future years, but this budget relies on that. So what do you plan to do to cover those issues?
So I think the school choice is a little easier. I think our balance there is a little more predictable and more understandable and less fluid. So I think it's what I should say is that the use this year is higher than we will typically use. We'll probably taper that over the next couple of years, and obviously, as with anything, from a revenue standpoint, we're going to look to hopefully have some of our Medicaid reimbursement come in and fill in a little bit of that gap over the next couple of years. And so, and hopefully, Chapter 70 funding, but that is the question as we move forward, is how do we replace those sort of one-time monies? I think from the standpoint of the E&D, Again, it's a bigger number this year, but we will taper that as well over the next couple of years. And I think the difficulty I've experienced in the couple of years in this role is that the disruption from the pandemic has made being predictive about our budgets, and we've kind of held on to revenues or resources during the year in anticipation of costs. And so it's been hard to predict how budgets will play out. And so that's, we've been conservative and therefore built our reserves over the last couple of years. I think as we get to a more regular circumstance of understanding, the longer lasting effects of the pandemic and the impacts on the budget and the permanent impacts on the budget, we'll have a greater understanding. And so our ability to sort of balance out and get to a more steady state relative to the use of E&D will be easier to do. But it will be, fiscal 24 could be, we'll have some challenges because we'll have a little less of those resources available, but we're trying to take those into account. I will also say as we go through this, sort of continuing evaluation of our budget, I think that if we find a circumstance that allows us to reduce that E&D number a little bit, we would. So it's going to be a balancing act as we go through and value, make those determinations on adjustments and Chapter 70. If Chapter 70 comes in $200,000 higher than what it is now, I'm going to use a lot less E&D. I mean, there's a limit though, because we can't hold E&D forever. So it's some of it kind of use it or lose it. I don't want to say lose it, but it isn't something that's we can kind of persist in our bank account forever. So we do have to use it in some respects, but at the same time, managing that over the next few years is a critical question, and we're going to try to do that in a moderate way and address those concerns.
I'm going to hold other questions, but later Andy Steinberg, who is also designated by the council to speak, will probably have some questions about the actual agreement and the formula. Thank you.
Right. So I just want to note it's 10:01. I see 3 additional hands now. I likely am going to be inclined to accept those 3 hands and no more for this part, because the next part of the meeting will offer the towns an opportunity to offer feedback and thoughts to the district, which is the purpose of today's meeting, so that the regional school committee, myself, Doug, can take that feedback and take some next steps in the budget. Certainly, I do want to note that this presentation is in the invitation that you all received to this meeting, so people have access to that. I also want to note that oftentimes Doug, myself, and sometimes chairs committee get invited to member towns meetings so that there can be more dialogue about the budget, and we're certainly open to that. So in other words, today's not the last time that members of the 4 towns have an opportunity to ask questions or share feedback on the budget. But the next person I see is Jim Walton.
Hi, Jim Welton from Shutesbury Finance Committee. Just a comment, and maybe to avoid some confusion or misunderstanding. The columns in this chart refer to fiscal year 22. I think you really want that to be fiscal year 23.
Yeah, I mislabeled that, sorry, or didn't update it.
Yeah. Okay, thanks.
Thanks, appreciate that, Jim. Very, very helpful. Kathy?
Just a quick request. You very quickly, when you went through the revenues and expenses, Doug, talked about the charter formula and how much we're getting, and Mike talked about competitive markets. Is there a place where I can see how much we spend on the charter, and do we have a separate report we generate? And I'm remembering 3 or 4 years ago when I first was getting on the council, there was a report talking about problems with the formula, but showed exactly how much we spent. So it's a request. It's not in these documents, and I don't need to see it now, but I think it would be really useful for us to be able to see it, because a small improvement in the formula would help a lot, as you know, in the coming years. So I just think that kind of document would be useful.
Yeah, I will just add one thing to that. So obviously the reimbursement is shown on this slide that I've got presented right here. When we have the fuller line by line budget that we bring out, there's a specific line that is, charter tuition, so you can sort of see that history. That's different. That just sort of, has either our actual spending in that area or our projection with our budget for that area. It doesn't talk to the more computational aspects of that, and so we can kind of come back to that and talk to that more specifically in the future. But as far as just seeing the budget line and sort of its behavior over time, you can see that through the line by line budget, which will come out in a couple weeks.
And last, Shalini.
Yeah, Town Councillor in Amherst. I just had a question about the decline in the budget for special education and what is the reason for that, especially when you look at it from 2016. It's been going down, and just an explanation for that. And also, I'm sure there was additional need for mental, emotional health support to students. Where is that accounted? Under what category is that accounted for?
So regarding special education, there are a number of factors that play into that. Some of it's who the kids are and what their needs are. So some of that, if our demographics change and the needs that kids have changed, that sometimes adjust that number up and down. The other thing that factors into that is the other kinds of support we get to cover those costs. Mm-hmm. So for example, if we have an extraordinary cost in special education, the state has what's commonly termed as a circuit breaker reimbursement that happens. And so what occurs is that once you get above a certain threshold of spending, then the costs above that threshold are eligible for some support from the state. So we incur those costs in one fiscal year. They give us the money the following fiscal year. And so from a budgeting standpoint, we then leverage it the year after that because we have it in hand. We know exactly what it is, and we put that into place. But it causes a lag in that. So if we have an uptick in students with high level of need, we'll often see that the budget line in that year is really quite high, and then it benefits us a couple years later. And so, there's sort of this lagging factor of support. So sometimes those decreases are where we had some expenses and we were able to then support our budget more significantly from circuit breaker funds. So that's part of it. A lot of it's driven by who the kids are and what those level of need are. Some kids' needs are quite expensive, and so can have a pretty profound impact on our budgets. And so we see quite a bit of variability there in that regard. There are also, outside of what you see here, which is the operating budget, there are other grants that we use and leverage, and so as we get into the next phase of the budgeting and we get a much more full budget book produced, we'll see those grants and sort of how those things like IDEA, which is a federal entitlement, and some of those things help support our budget and provide some relief to those areas. With regard to some of those mental health and emotional supports that we've been putting in place over the last year or so, a lot of those are being funded with those external grant funds from the federal government, the ESSER funds. So they'll typically in the short term certainly not show up in what you're seeing here, but will be in some of the materials we have relative to those grant spending that we do. I will relative to ESSER funding in particular, there's a sort of a one-page grid. It's fairly dense that was in the school committee packet last Tuesday night. School committee didn't get an opportunity to get into the conversation about that, but that gives a little bit of the spending plan for the ESSER specific funding that is projected at the moment. And so that's a resource. If you go to the school committee packet from last Tuesday's meeting, you should find that in there and be able to kind of review the current frame of what we're going to do relative to that spending.
Thank you.
Great. So we're now going to transition to if towns want to offer feedback on the level service budget and what they've seen. It's 10:08 now, and I'm sorry to be the timekeeper, but that's part of one of my responsibilities. And sometimes we shortchange capital. I want to make sure that doesn't happen this time around. So if someone does want to communicate for their member town some initial feedback or thoughts, if you just use the raise hand feature, and we'll make sure all 4 towns are able to share their thoughts. And the first town that looks like they would like to are ready to share their thoughts is Pelham. So I'll turn it over to John Trickey.
John Trickey, Pelham Finance Committee. The increase to Pelham is quite substantial. It's depending on which column you look at, it'll be between 40 and 55,000. But when I compare that with the old regional agreement, it's sort of in line with what's happening. And it's also in line with our increased percentage of students in the region. So as difficult as it's going to be, as we only have about 90,000 a year to spend, a good portion of that 90,000 is going to go to the regional budget. But as usual, Pelham will pay its bills.
Thank you, John. And I'm going to transition to Andy Steinberg, who I believe, as mentioned earlier, is going to speak on behalf of the town of Amherst.
Actually, I'm sharing this with Lynn Griezman because I think that she has some comments to make about the budget side of it. But I think that the one thing that, or one of the things we want to talk about a little bit is that this really is not something that is a sustainable budget and assessment method. And we really do need to talk about that as a four-town community. And I just want to note that between FY18 and FY22, the region's budget increased by 5.1%. Total assessments went up 5%. Amherst's assessment went up 8.04%. And the assessments for the other three towns during that 5-year period went down 10.2% to for one town to 1.79% decrease for on the low side. But the assessments for the other three towns did go down while Amherst went up substantially during that period of time. Everybody looks at Amherst as, oh, well, they're the big city and they can afford that. But I think that there needs to be an understanding that it isn't that simple in Amherst because we have the university and the university and the colleges really skew things because 50% of, that they comprise 50% of the land in the town, and another 30% is taken out of being a taxable land for other reasons, so that we have a large portion of our land that is not taxable, but yet we have this huge population that we're providing services to that we don't get revenue for. And so that the whole formula basis that is in the minimum contribution portion just doesn't work for our region because you have the biggest community that has this huge population for which it really doesn't receive any revenue. We are not getting significant pilot payments from any of the nonprofit institutions, and certainly not into the general town budget. But yet we are providing services to that. So we have a population of 40,000, but it's not 40,000 people that are paying the tax revenue for it. And so when you put all of that together, we do have this large problem that I think that we still are not grappling with as a four-town community to try and come up with a reasonable school budget and a reasonable assessment method that is going to work. And I just have to put that out there as something that needs to be understood. I think that, as I have said in previous meetings, I understand what the circumstances are for our neighboring towns, very sympathetic to it, but I think we really do need to talk about what we can afford and how we can afford to fund it in order to have a sustainable long term. And with that, Lynn, I don't know if you have anything that you wanted to say, but I appreciate her being able to say something about the budget side.
Mike, do you want me to go next?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think it'd be helpful to hear from the town, and then we'll transition to the other towns. Thank you, Lynn. Thank you, Andy.
So there's two observations that we want to make about this specific budget. And one is that we have provided you and the school committee with our financial guidelines for FY23, that includes only a 2.5% increase for the schools. And at this point, none of the existing formulas, agreements, if you will, come to that point for us. The lowest, of course, is the actual regional agreement, which we haven't been using for a number of years. So this really just builds right onto Andy's point. The other thing that we really keep coming back to, and previously counselors have mentioned this, so I'm going to mention it again, and that is that our cost per students in our schools are high. We recognize that our salaries and our benefits are in line with other towns and cities around us. But we really would like more information about class size and what really is driving that cost, because as we continue to see decreased enrollments, which we're seeing now starting in the 7th and 8th grade is when the baby boomlet has dropped off. This is just going to continue. And at what point are we going to say we have to make some adjustments in how we think about our maintaining our quality, but perhaps doing other things that allow us to maintain quality but decrease costs? Thank you.
Thanks. And I'll respond to that one directly because there was a question in there, but I'll wait till after all the towns have spoken about the data on class size, because that's something we have and was recently presented. Rita, I think you're going to speak for your town.
Sure. Rita Farrell, Shutesbury Select Board. Not to sound like a broken record, but I think Shutesbury has been very clear over the course of budget discussions over the last, I don't know how many number of years, that our goal is to achieve 100% statutory with a 5-year rolling average, that is the most fair and equitable approach. And that, all the committees represented here today are unanimous in that belief. And going back to over 70% of communities in the state use the statutory method, and we feel that taking into account the ability to pay for communities is the approach that should be taken.
Thank you. And I see Julie has her hand up. Julie, I think you need to unmute yourself.
Julie Shively, Leverett Select Board. We, as a town, have stated this often. We would prefer to go back to the regional method. We feel that is most fair, with everyone paying the same dollar amount per student going to the school. The greater concern to me is that since in the long term, Amherst will not be able to really support a total statutory method, and we will have to degrade our schools. My kids got a great education in that school, and I would like to see future generations have the same opportunities and class options and extracurricular options that my kids had.
Thank you, Julie. We're going to give an opportunity, not that they have to, but if any of the regional school committee members would like to offer any thoughts, they're certainly welcome to at this point. I'm going to respond a little bit, and then after those, that perspective is offered, we can transition to capital. We'll see if we have time for additional comments from the member towns, but I want to give regional school committee members, my apologies, an opportunity to respond if they'd like. And I believe I see Irv Rhodes was the first regional school committee member I saw with his hand up. So Irv.
Thank you, Mike. Well, I really appreciate this meeting because it brings out a lot of issues and points of view that need to be covered. But when I go back to the budget, one of the things that is really striking about this budget presentation is that Doug presented a budget without that is really a hard money budget, without all of the soft money shown. Just imagine if the town did the same thing. and presented a budget with only the hard money, but none of the soft money being shown and what that would look like. So it took a lot of courage to do that. And that needs to be borne in mind by everyone who's looked at this budget. Second, in terms of the question about our quality of education, I think that if I were in Doug's position, that I would have started out the budget presentation by saying, hey, what do we wish our kids to think about, to be, to value, to love, to enjoy? How do we want our kids to be educated along those lines? And then look at the cost of that. What cost would we apply to that? We are a school system who values our high level degree of education for our children. These are our kids, and it's our duty to educate them appropriately and to do it in such a way that's not only cost effective, but educationally effective. To look at one and say, well, let's look at cost per student. And if you want to increase class size to bring down cost per student, then you have to look at what the impact of that would be. And that needs to firmly remain in our consciousness. We are talking about an educational process here that we are not alone. We are in competition. And if we want to remain competitive, we need to have the educational funding that promotes that and sustains that. Thank you.
Thank you, Irv. It's up. Regional School Committee Member Peter Demling's hand up, so I'll call him Peter.
Yeah, so I'll try to be as quick as possible. So I appreciate the comments from Amherst Town councilors on the impact of the charter formula and pilot programs that could have. To be perfectly blunt, those are way above our pay grade, but we need to advocate for them. And the only way that any of that is going to happen is with sustained, organized, grassroots political advocacy. We're doing what we can about those. We talk about it. We have some initiatives going, but please reach out to me or other members of the Regional School Committee if you want to get involved in putting some effort into that. There's things that we can align with the Mass Teachers Association. There's political change coming, hopefully at the state level, which is an absolute requirement for either of those things going forward. But just generally speaking about the town of Amherst's approach to the assessment method and the budget, the assessment method, it's bewildering to me that the town of Amherst has such a resistance to incorporate ability to pay when we are a community that pulls a muscle patting ourselves on the back with how progressive we are. The regional agreement method, 100% regional agreement method, does not incorporate ability to pay. And even though there's a slight savings to Amherst between that method and say the 65% blend, less like about 100K, I think it's reasonable for the town of Amherst to consider what is a reasonable ability to pay. That being said, I think it's clear from my attendance at these meetings that there's irreconcilable differences between how the different communities define ability to pay. But we need an ability to pay. And so we can't just be hardcore 100% regional agreement. And as to the budget, Lynn Griezman asks a reasonable question. At what point are we going to say we need to do things for cost efficiency and declining enrollment? We've cut $2.4 million from the regional budget in the last 5 years, including over $1 million in FY19 and did massive amounts of things to assess declining enrollment and budget efficiencies, including closing Southeast Campus, moving Summit Academy to the high school, and a host of other things. And it is hyper simplistic to compare our district to other districts just by per pupil cost. You say, what are we getting for this? How are we being efficient? We're not just making sprockets here. We're investing in not just electives, but in meeting the needs of our special needs students, investing in the arts, the social emotional piece, because that's what we value. And so it's not enough just to say, hey, look at this per pupil cost. That's not a reasonable budget. I think this is a reasonable budget, especially after the cuts that we've gone and done in the last 4 or 5 years, and we can get into those details. But that's where I'm at in terms of what our committee should be proposing for a budget and the assessment method that we should be proposing for our towns to approve as well.
Oh, I want to offer any other regional school committee. AJ, I do see your hand up. I think I'll probably hold with school committee members at this point. I'm happy to follow up offline with you, as is Doug, but I'm just getting real concerned about capital, and I don't want to squeeze it. But I do see another regional school committee member with their hand up. Jennifer, would you like to jump in?
Sure. Thanks, Mike. I'm going to pick up on a theme that Peter Demling introduced, which is the idea of, you didn't say this exactly, but the idea of putting yourself in someone else's shoes and trying to see things from other towns' perspectives. I'm new to this. This is my first 4 towns meeting. So I'm just going to say the obvious thing, which is that it seems like both Shutesbury and Leverett, the formula that you prefer, the one that you think is the most fair and equitable, is also the one that has you paying the least. And is that a coincidence? Maybe, maybe not. So I think maybe like a fun exercise or hypothetical might be for some of us, or for all of us, to pretend that you're from another one of the 4 towns, and what would you think would be the most fair and equitable for all if you were from a different town from the one you're from? Just as an idea to try to help us see things from someone else's perspective. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Just give a last call for school. Oh, I didn't even need to. Margaret, you're welcome to jump in.
Margaret Stancer, Regional Committee, representative from Pelham. So also following on what Mr. Demling had to say, is we are in a competitive environment. We might not like to be for students. And if we continue, if we don't continue to provide a high quality education, we're going to lose more students, which means we're going to lose more funding. So it becomes really a downward spiral. That's it.
Thank you, Margaret. Any other comments from regional school committee members? I just wanted to comment because it's a factual question, and Ms. Griezmer raised a question about class size. There was a pretty lengthy class size report. It's 1 page, but it has a hyperlink that's like 10 pages long that details the class size of our middle school and high school. We did, as you may remember, reduce a half team at the middle school last year, and that did increase class size. And so that report, Lynn, I sent it to anyone who is interested. You could just ask me for it, but it's a public document on our website, so there's no secret. But it does give a pretty good handle on those things. The next step on this one is that the regional school committee meeting on my side, I can't speak to the member boards and towns, but on my side, I know this will be on the regional agenda at our next meeting, which is a week from this coming Tuesday. To take in the feedback we heard and try to have dialogue about next steps on the regional school committee end. Clearly, another 4-town meeting, sorry to grab Saturdays. It seems like it's going to need to be in order to gather all this feedback, consider it, and then to craft a draft budget that we feel like we can bring to the 4 towns. But the feedback's invaluable, so I really appreciate the different perspectives we heard. It's not unusual that they don't agree with one another, right? It's my 6th year in this role, so it's not my first time at the rodeo. And what I appreciate is that the towns do listen to each other as well as the regional schools and try to work on this over the next couple months so we can land in a place that that moves us forward as an organization as well as a larger group of towns who come together to support the students in our regional schools. So I really do appreciate the feedback and the dialogue and the time that you're all spending. But I wanted to make sure we got there before 10:30, Doug. I got there a little before 10:30, so there's unfortunately some pretty complex things to talk about on this one. And much like we did on the operational budget, I think today's conversation is, here's where we are, here's some of the concerns, here's some of the issues, here's some of the options. We'll see if we have time to gather feedback, but these are things, some of these things the regional school committee hasn't even really had a full chance to dive in on because it's an evolving situation. But we didn't want to come back to in a couple weeks or a month without kind of letting folks know at least what's on the table for capital needs for the regional schools. So Doug, I'm going to open it up again for you to be able to present those slides. Again, these are all available in the invitation you all got to the meeting as well as on our website. But yep, you're all set, Doug.
Need to make sure to unmute myself. So one thing I will say, and I won't probably, or if I show the slide, it'll be very, very briefly because the print's way too small for anybody to really read. But included in here is a sort of 10-year capital plan. It's the two things I would say about that is it is more towards a worst case scenario. So the pricing and estimates of time are both aggressive and on the high side. So the timeframes are fairly tight and moved forward a little bit. Some of those won't play out that way, and we'll balance that out as we go forward in time. And the other thing is that it does assume sort of the sort of largest amounts that we think are still reasonable, but on the higher side of projections for that. So I'll just keep that in the back of your mind as you think about a longer term horizon for capital. For the coming year, the other thing I'll say as a prelude to getting into the coming year is that the last couple of years we've spent a lot less on capital. We've done plenty of capital type projects, but a lot of the things were related to pandemic response and utilize some pandemic funding to cover those. So as we head into this fiscal 23, we're going to start ramping back up into some more routine and regular capital items, some things that have been deferred and become more urgent, and then also just back to the sort of needs that the district has relative to maintaining our buildings and facilities. So to that end, I'm going to start on the right-hand side of this diagram or this slide to talk about the district-wide needs, and I'll just outline briefly the project we're considering for fiscal 23. First one there under regional share of transmitter and bus software, the current equipment that we use to communicate with the buses as they go around and are out and about from our central office here in the middle school. That equipment failed, and we've borrowed some equipment from one of our providers to have that communication currently, but we need to buy new equipment and the associated software with that. That is shared out with the Pelham School and the Amherst School as well, and so the piece that is the regions to contribute to that is the $10,000 indicated there. We have an energy management and HVAC control system throughout all our facilities here. That's in need of a pretty strong upgrade over the next several years. Fortunately, we can do this in a piecemeal way. This would be the first step in that, which is getting some software updated, and then there'll be the subsequent hardware and associated equipment over the next couple of years. The infrared electrical system distribution analysis and repair. It's a long name, but the long story short is we look at this is a mechanism for evaluating the electrical service at each of the buildings, look for problems and issues with that system. Is it of a sufficient size? Is it of a sufficient safety, et cetera, et cetera? It'll give us an indication of whether there are repair work or additional things we need to add to our electrical service in the building. So it's a first step in a ongoing repair and analysis of our electrical systems in our buildings. As those of you who have been at these meetings for a while know, we had an ADA study relative to the accessibility of our buildings a couple years ago. There's a number of items that were mentioned. This ongoing ADA work is support to make sure those projects and adjustments to our building and facilities are incorporated into our capital work as we go from year to year. As we go to the middle school, this is where we have our central information systems server set up, and the room that contains those servers has a couple of small mini split heat pump systems that are aging out, and so they need to be replaced. That's the mini split replacement there. In the middle school, the fire system upgrade is about getting some software in place to begin an upgrade again with the fire system. It's kind of an ongoing project that you kind of continually improve that system over time. In the middle school, that's going to be more of a software improvement. At the high school, that fire system safety upgrade is more equipment upgrades and getting the systems in place that have that the software has been upgraded a little more recently, and so now it's time to do some of the hardware and physical equipment replacements there. The courtyard tree removal. There's a tree in a courtyard that is fairly large. But because it's in a courtyard, it's going to require a crane in order to actually remove it. It's ending its life, and it overhangs the building, but it's also over a greenhouse that's used for science classes. I had conversations recently with the finance director in the town of Amherst. He was saying that his DPW thought they might be able to provide some either resources or support in regard to that project, which may hopefully bring that price down a little bit. But it's in a difficult location. The tree is starting to fail. You sort of, do we take care of it now, or do things start to fall and create other problems for us? So that's what's going on there. But the big project we're going to talk about a little bit more extensively is this fields and track renovation. The track is in really unacceptable shape at the current time. It is needing to be redone and resurfaced. But a couple of years ago, the regional schools, in partnership with the town of Amherst, did a master plan study of recreational facilities throughout the middle of the town of Amherst. There was a recommendation to do some reorientation of facilities in and around the regional schools to provide greater functionality, as well as a larger amount of or more efficient use of the space we have. And so we've been, sort of holding off on that master plan as other things have played out. And so unfortunately, the fields and the track in particular are in difficult circumstance relative to their ability to function as facilities for us. And so we really need to take action on those. There are a variety of options relative to that, which is why there's a range of prices. From the simplest of just taking the existing track in its current orientation and resurfacing it, that's in the sort of $1.2 million range. If we were to take that and look at that master planning process we did with the town of Amherst and to reorient the track in a north-south direction, that's, depending on what type of options we choose, can get up into the $4.65 million range. And so we wanted to have some feedback from the community relative to those options. We're still evaluating and getting information relative to those. And so let me put this in the right place and move to the next slide so you can actually see this.
Yeah, Doug, if I can just add a little bit of context while you're pulling up the slide. So one of the challenges right now is that we've had officials from the MIA, which is the governing board for athletics, suggest that we can't hold meets on our track, and they had questions about the safety and security of having students participate, even practice on our track facility. We keep on filling the problems, but that's why the track there's a track only option. One of the challenges is that the field that's inside the track is not regulation sized and in poor condition. So for instance, one of our soccer teams was hosting a playoff game that could not be held at home this year because it didn't fit the MIA standards and regulations. It was held at South Hadley High School. And so I use that as just information as to why this is a complex set of situations, because you've got a track, you've also got what's inside the track. Even if the track is fixed, the field is actually both in poor condition and not the right size. And so the challenge with option one, while it does take care of the immediate need, it actually prevents you from solving the other problem. If it doesn't get reoriented, then that field stays the wrong size relatively indefinitely. And so I know you're going to say some of this, Doug, but I just wanted to, while you were doing the slides, get it out of the way. And the difference between option 2 and option 3 is option 2 has the reorientation so that the field can be have the right size and replace it, and that's a grass option or natural turf. And option 3 is a synthetic turf option. We're going to be bringing this back to the regional school committee meeting in the next couple of weeks, getting some more external reports on this. So I don't want to go too far into that, but there are some real differences about operating costs, which are generally lower for artificial turf, usability, which tend to be, especially for the community, not just the athletics program, which tend to be a bit higher for option 3. So I don't want to go to the deep dive in the difference between grass and athletic, natural grass or synthetic, but essentially the 3 options are: one is to renovate the track and deal with the field sometime in the future, which would unfortunately mean ripping up the track that you just put money into. So it has some real challenges with it. The second is to solve the orientation and have a grass field, and option 3 is solve the orientation with the synthetic field. All these estimates came from Weston and Sampson, which are a consultant group that came in. In other words, it wasn't me and Doug in a back room cooking up numbers. That's not how this works. These are people who are involved in these projects across the region, not just Western Mass, actually the Eastern Mass firm. I think we're getting to the place where our student athletes, as well as the community, are operating on fields and track surfaces that the professional organization is suggesting isn't safe, isn't sufficient to support students. And that's why there's urgency. This is one of those proverbial kick the can down the road moments where it's been kicked long enough, and we're now getting to a place where we can't really sustain what we need for our student athletes as well as the community, because these fields, and particularly the track, is used all the time by the larger community. So sorry, I'm going to do that part. Doug, if you want to talk a bit about funding, it's 10:40, so I'm just conscious that we do want to get some feedback, but it's going to be a little limited until we have more information and data to share with you. But this is relatively hot off the press for the 4 towns we wanted to share while we were meeting.
Right. So couple of things I'll add. The north-south orientation is also important. It creates, like I said, greater efficiency in the space use in and around the school. Second thing is the orientation of it more east-west is problematic from a competition standpoint, because in late afternoon, if you're the goalie on the west-facing end, you're staring into the sun. It's not a fair competition, not a safe competition. So it's obviously been manageable for years, but that's another additional reason to reorient the field and track in that regard. So what I've done here on the first slide, and again, we would most likely bond this, so we'd be paying for it over time. This is the sort of raw cost of the track, the 3 different options, and apportioning it to each of the 4 communities based on our regional agreement method for capital spending. It's using the most recent EQV data, which is what we use. There'll be a new one come out this May, so these will change a little bit relative to how EQV changes in the coming year. But you can sort of see what the sort of bite to each of the communities would be over time. It doesn't have the interest cost built in there, but nonetheless, you can kind of see how it plays out for each community. So one of the questions that gets raised, or a couple of points that get raised relative to a facility like this and where it sits, is some of the things about how else might we fund this, or what are the obligations of certain things. So one thing is that many of the costs that are associated with this are eligible for CPA use. Just before the pandemic hit, I had visited each of your CPA committees and asked for funding, and then the pandemic sort of messed with that. But it is an option that's available to us as for something. It's a way to provide some support. One of the nice things about CPA is that some of the monies that you have available for that are by funds from the state. Let me say that they're funds from the state. And so that's a helpful thing to reduce a little bit of the burden on your local tax and property owners as far as generating revenue there. So that's an important piece to keep in mind about using CPA money. It is eligible, like I said, for use, and it is eligible for use in regional schools. So it doesn't have to be physically within the confines of your community. So that's there is opinion and precedent relative to that use. The second thing is, because those fields and the track sets within the larger community of Amherst, and it provides a resource to Amherst. There's some. It's a resource for all 4 towns because all the kids get to use it. It's and people can drive in from the towns and use the track. They can walk the track, but it's really a greater resource for the town of Amherst and for the things that Amherst is doing. And so there's some indication that maybe Amherst might be. Should consider maybe a more significant investment in this as a town itself. And so, as an example of something we could do, I'm not saying we should or shouldn't do this, is that we could apportion those costs, a third to the CPA, a third to the town of Amherst, and a third to the regional schools. And for the CPA and for the region, I've broken it out using that same regional assessment method. So even if you decide not to use CPA at all, it would be the same cost to your town relative to that. So what this little grid of things is showing each of those 3 options sort of split out that way as a mechanism to sort of fund this, that it sort of shifts burdens a little bit. And what we see is that the total sort of bill to Amherst goes from about a 79% up to about 86% from the pure regional agreement method. And that reduces the other, but that also gives some indication that the town of Amherst has a resource physically within its confines that is a little more available to its citizens, and so it's a nod in that direction. And so I just wanted to, like I said, lay this out in front of folks as an idea of something we could do and to consider as we think about this and get some feedback about how extensively we want to invest into this and attend to this need. It's pretty great. I think there are a lot of details, as the superintendent indicated, around surfaces and other details that we'll be getting more cost information on, as well as have those conversations community-wide around in the coming weeks. And so we look forward to those, but we wanted to get some initial feedback from folks relative to this particular project, which is a pretty big project coming up. I think the next slide, if I'm not mistaken. So on this slide, what we've done is taken, and again, sort of projecting worst case. So I'm taking the largest amount of that track project and putting into this capital plan, and then forecasting it, the borrowing related to that, and the interest rates that are charged, and so on and so forth. And so what you see in this is how that plays out along with the other capital projects into the assessments for the 4 towns. And so I think the thing to point out here is that we've had pretty low numbers over the last couple of years. If we were to show the one previous to that's even smaller, we're going to start seeing an uptick in this. You see the overall assessment and burden to the communities for capital is going to increase pretty significantly over time. We'll balance that out a little bit. The projection here is that the middle school roof that we have authorization for would kick in fiscal 24. Whether that really will be the case or not, we're dependent upon. We're submitting for reimbursement from the state through the MSBA for that project, and so when they will fund that, they keep sort of moving the goalpost on when they might fund that kind of roofing project. So that'll change that time horizon and shift things as well. But this number here in this range of overall a little over $500,000, again assumes the most expensive version of the track and fields project, and it being borne by the regional agreement method in its entirety. So that sets a sort of upper bound of where people are, and so this will change a little bit as we move through and get more information about the project, and we have those conversations about surfaces and orientation and all that sort of thing. I did want to put these numbers in front of you for that purpose. On this next slide, this is a slide I alluded to earlier, which is very busy. I'm just going to mention here again, taking sort of estimates. If you could see this, but you probably can't. But right here is where the track and fields improvements are, and that's got the 4.65 million in there. That's you'll see some other things that are fairly large numbers in here. We're going to continue to balance that out and have those conversations, but I did want to give you a sense of some of the projects that are coming up over the coming years and get a sense of that. We'll have a more extensive 10-year plan that we're writing in the process of reviewing and writing up and have available as we get into our next cycle of things. But I did want to get this in front of you and mention that. I'll go back to this previous slide, but I think I'll stop there. I think that sort of frames the conversation a little bit, and I wanted to put in front of everyone that track project and get some feedback from folks about about that and its cost and the conversations we're going to have moving forward relative to that. So thank you, and I look forward to your questions and feedback.
Okay, so just noting that 2 things, and then we'll open it up. I see John's got his hand up. One is that it's 10:47, and the only thing maybe I'm good at guaranteeing is that we'll end this meeting at 11. So we'll take some comments, but we are going to end right at 11 o'clock. I also want to note that the regional school committee has not offered an opinion on the track question at this point. So I think it's just important to note that we didn't want to lose an opportunity for the 4 towns to hear it. But there's no proposal being made today about what to do with the track. But this is based on a recent updated report that we received from consultants who have expertise in this area. And I think my comments at the beginning were to highlight that we've got an ongoing problem that will need to be dealt with one way or the other. And there's a couple options to think about, and the regional school committee will certainly consider and jump in on that. But I see there's a couple comments and questions. And so the first one I see is from John Trickey.
Thanks, John Trickey, Pelham Finance Committee. Thanks for putting together this 10-year plan. This is what we need to be able to look ahead and plan out our cash flow and be prepared for expenses as they come down the pike. One thing I didn't see on your plan for this year, I thought there was a problem with the girls' shower and facilities that need to be upgraded. Has it been done, or is it? I didn't see it happening this year. I thought that was a high priority. But more importantly, as I look down at your current layout, assuming everything falls the regional assessment to pay for all capital plans, when you get out into the 27, 28, 29, 30, The portion for Pelham is equal more than up to about 40% to 70% of our total available capital money for the town. So if that indeed comes into play, we're going to be really strapped in the town to be able to fund that period of time. We will start, if this is the will of the committee, we'll start putting the money. We have an account now for regional capital. We just have to up that from free cash to be sure it's there when the bill comes due. So the sooner we know what the plan is, the sooner we know how to react. Thank you.
Thank you, John. I'm going to go to Rita Farrell. Again, many of you have introduced yourselves before, but just because not everybody knows everybody, if you could again introduce yourself and what town and board you're from.
Rita Farrell, Shutesbury Select Board. I just echo John's thank you about having that 10-year capital plan. And while the Shutesbury committees did not go through the track proposal in any depth, I did want to reinforce that it is CPA eligible, that the Regional School Committee had come before the CPC in Shutesbury and it was deemed eligible. So we do have available CPA funds and would be happy to entertain an application.
Thank you, Rita. Lynn?
Yes, I have a couple of questions and then an overall comment. Can the ESSER monies pay for any of the capital costs related to air quality and ventilation? That seems to be an ongoing issue. So that's one question. As we look specifically at the overall, first of all, thank you for doing a 10-year projection. I think that is outstanding and very consistent with what we're asking people in Amherst to do. Concerning the rising costs of services, can we also take into consideration what Amherst does do for the region at little or no cost? And then finally, as you know, because you're very involved in the elementary schools, Amherst is in the process of embarking on 4 major capital projects. We've already made a commitment to the library. We will be making a commitment sometime within the next 12 months, I'm sure, or 12 to 15 months to an elementary school. And we still have our DPW and our fire station on our list. So when we look at these things, we need to consider the fact that while right now we have hefty reserves, we aren't going to have hefty reserves when we get done with catching up with our own capital needs within the town. And that's just something we need to make sure that people are aware of. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn. And I'll answer your first question. Yes, the ventilation, the purification, the HEPA filters, all was paid, from ESSER funds. This is not, there's some things like replacement of filters that's ineligible. Yeah. But in terms of the major cost, that's been apportioned to the grant funds. I do want to note, because I see some school committee members' hands are up, that this is not a meeting of the Amherst School Committee meeting. It was the elementary school. It was not posted as such. So, Lynn, you're able to say whatever you want. I just want to remind my good friends on the Amherst School Committee they should not be speaking about an elementary building project when they make their comments. But I see Mr. Sullivan, and then I see Mr. Rhodes with their hands up. So we'll start with Mr. Sullivan.
Yeah, so I was a member of that committee that it was only supposed to meet for 1 year, but that field committee met for 2.5 or 3 years. And one of the things I learned is that part of that track does sit on regional property and part of the track sits in the town of Amherst. So that's a little bit of an issue. But as far as the track itself, it's not simply just overlaying. That track has outlived its lifespan about 10 years ago. So it's really not just overlaying the track. It would be removing the track and starting from scratch. And as far as the girls' locker room and bathroom, that's my little pet project. Since I got on the school committee in 2014, in 2012, the boys' locker room was upgraded. It had some leaks, but it was upgraded. And I've been pushing to upgrade the girls' locker room since then. And I believe there was a $20,000 or $25,000 we put aside for a redesign of it, but it was scheduled for 2025 or 2026. Thank you.
Thank you. And I might have missed it, but I'm not sure Steve identified, but Steve Sullivan is the Regional School Committee representative from the town of Shutesbury. And I think the last word will go to Mr. Rhodes.
This is more of a Amherst specific comment and a general comment that I've been looking at the demographics in relationship to the 2020 census. And one of the most incredible things that when you look at it is that the white population in Amherst has decreased. The minority population has increased. Now, historically, what that has meant in relationship to support for schools is that the support for schools would start to go down when you see that kind of inversion. I really, as a member of the school committee, will not allow that to happen. To have a decrease in support for schools based upon the kinds of arguments that come up that I've seen in the past. The past definitely does not need to be prologue, but we must be well aware that that is a pattern, and that pattern is something that should not be repeated in Amherst.
Thank you, Irv. So I think with that, we'll conclude this meeting, this four-town meeting. I want to thank everyone for their participation. I would thank everyone for their questions. It was incredibly helpful in December when we met that you had questions like the one about the 10-year capital plan. That helps us provide the data and information that you all need as you're both considering your next steps as well as your town's next steps. Our next plan, as I said, is we'll bring all this feedback back, and I imagine there'll be a very robust conversation at the next regional school committee meeting, which I believe is the 18th of January, if I'm remembering correctly, if my dates are correct. And certainly anyone is willing to come and make public comment as well as observe the dialogue and deliberation of the regional school committee as we plan some next steps as what to do. We will be back in touch probably after that meeting about scheduling another four-town meeting with more concrete proposals, both on operational as well as on the capital side, likely in the month. Typically it's early February. I think that's a likely occurrence again, but I don't want to speak out of turn because the regional school committee meeting regional school committee will need to consider its next steps at that meeting. Please, in the interim, be in touch with Dr. Slaughter, myself, with any questions you have, any comments that you'd like to make. We are available. We want to provide resources for the different towns, other questions that come up that you hear from your community members. I see one of our critical community members and children in the background of some of our screens. It's that time of the meeting. So it's a good one to end with, because that's why we're all here is we're trying to figure out how do we work with our member towns and their financial realities to provide the highest quality education for our schools. I'm going to just make an executive decision because it's a very awkward on the regional on this four-town meeting. I'll consider all the boards and committees recessed or dismissed, right? We'll end those meetings. We don't have to go around, I think, in this virtual format. I hope you enjoy the rest of your Saturday, and we'll be in touch very soon. Thank you so much for being here. Enjoy the cold sun today.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Have a good day.